Alien 3 was a nightmare, not just for the characters on screen struggling to stay alive from the relentless pursuit of a xenomorph, but for the turmoil behind the scenes that rivaled any horror the film depicted. Unlike James Cameron's action-packed Aliens, which was celebrated for deviating from the original sci-fi horror roots, David Fincher's Alien 3 was criticized for being a glum retread of the first film. However, it was originally shaping up to continue the tradition of taking the franchise in new directions, with a daring and unique adventure featuring Ripley trying to survive against a camouflaging xenomorph in a massive, round, wooden space station populated by monks who shun modern technology. So let's dive in and find out why it was never made, and also take a look at what could have been Alien 3. Following the success of both Alien and Aliens, 20th Century Fox was eager to cash in on a third installment. But Walter Hill and David Geyer of Brandywine Productions, who produced the first two films, weren't as enthusiastic, as they didn't want to just do a rehash of one of the previous two movies. Still, Brandywine was open to exploring potential storylines, and came up with an idea for a two-parter that would be a parable for the Cold War arms race, and feature Michael Biehn's Corporal Hicks as the star of the third film, before bringing back Sigourney Weaver's Ripley to reunite with Hicks for the fourth film. Weaver surprisingly embraced the idea of stepping aside for Alien 3, partly due to her worry that there were only so many places to take Ripley as a character, and also due to her dissatisfaction with Fox for cutting a scene from Aliens, where Ripley learns of her daughter's death, which would have added a new dimension to Ripley's character as a grieving mother, and explained her immediate attachment to Newt and her emotional investment in protecting her. Plus, Weaver was also suing Fox for unpaid profits from Aliens. Fox, for their part, reluctantly agreed to this, but asked Brandywine to hire Ridley Scott to direct, who helmed the first film. However, when they approached him, he was more interested in doing a film about the origin of the xenomorphs. Regardless, his schedule was too busy to fit it in anyway, but he'd returned to realize this idea years later. To write part 1, Brandywine hired neuromancer writer William Gibson, the man responsible for popularizing the cyberpunk genre, and his script would have picked up after Aliens, with the Sulaco drifting into a region of space controlled by the Union of Progressive Peoples, a socialist faction akin to the Soviet Union. Eventually, the Sulaco is boarded by UPP forces, who are attacked by a facehugger hiding in the entrails of Bishop's severed torso. The soldiers kill it and then take Bishop with them for further study. The Sulaco then arrives at a space station / shopping mall hybrid named Anchor Point, where it's met by colonial Marines from the United Americas, who are in a Cold War with the UPP. The Marines recover additional xenomorph genetic material from Bishop's severed legs in the Sulaco's hangar, as both major powers attempt to develop the xenomorphs as biological weapons, driven by fear and paranoia that their rivals are doing the same, mirroring the Cold War arms race. The Marines then are attacked by two aliens in the cryosleep bay, which sees Ripley's cryotube damaged as the Marines fend off the attack, plunging her into a coma, while Newt and Hicks are woken up. Newt leaves Anchor Point headed for Earth to live with her grandparents, while Hicks investigates rumors of xenomorph experimentation happening aboard Anchor Point, which he finds out are being conducted by the Weyland-Yutani Corp. Eventually, it's discovered that the xenomorphs can now reproduce through airborne contagion, like a virus. Once inhaled, the victim undergoes a transformation, ultimately tearing off their skin to become a xenomorph. This concept was designed to introduce suspense, as nobody would know who among them was infected until it was too late, creating a heightened sense of paranoia, inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing. The xenomorphs rapidly begin to reproduce and spread on Anchor Point, as Hicks, realizing the station is doomed, teams up with a now repaired Bishop to overload the station's core and blow it up. They eventually succeed, but not before ejecting a comatose Ripley from the station in an escape pod, sending her back to Earth. They're then rescued by a UPP fighter craft, allowing them to escape right before the station explodes. After learning that some of the material recovered from Bishop's legs has been sent to Earth aboard the ship with Newt, Bishop mentions that humanity is now united against a common enemy, the xenomorphs, and must find their homeworld so that they can be eradicated once and for all, teasing the fourth film, which would have been an epic battle versus the aliens. When Gibson turned in his script, Brandywine didn't like it. While there were a ton of action scenes in it, including one that took place on a spacewalk outside the space station, the producers felt that not only was it too similar to Aliens, but it lacked an emotional journey for Hicks, which Aliens had with Ripley's relationship with Newt. Plus, they felt it was missing the cyberpunk aesthetic that initially attracted them to hiring Gibson to write the script in the first place. Regardless, Renny Harlin, who had just directed A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, was approached to direct, as the producers hoped the script could be rewritten, as they still liked some elements of it. However, Harlin, similar to the producers' first instinct, wanted to do something entirely different, and have Ripley and a team of scientists and soldiers visit the aliens' home planet to learn more about them. Writer William Gibson wasn't interested and left the project. project, while Fox shot down the idea as they felt it would be too expensive. Harlin then pitched the aliens coming to Earth, but Fox wanted it to take place in outer space, so they compromised and commissioned a script that saw a team of soldiers board the Sulaco, only to find Ripley, Hicks, and Newt having fallen victim to the aliens. Afterwards, the story follows the soldiers back to their home, which is a biodome in space, resembling small-town rural America, similar to Cooper Station in Interstellar, culminating in the townsfolk battling hordes of xenomorphs. Brandywine didn't like this version at all, as a new writer, David Toohey of Critters 2, was brought in to rewrite the first version of the script. But since the Cold War was winding down, the nuclear arms parable was no longer relevant, as the script would be rewritten to take place on a big prison ship. Renny Harlin, however, hated it, feeling the first Alien film was relatable because they were all blue-collar workers, as he worried that the audience wouldn't care about prisoners as protagonists. Uninterested in directing the script, Harlin would exit the project, leaving it without a director. In fact, Harlin wasn't the only one who disliked the script, as Fox chairman Joe Roth didn't like the idea of an Alien film without Ripley, feeling she was the centerpiece of the franchise. To woo her back, he offered her $4 million plus a cut of box office receipts, which she'd accept on the condition that the story would have to be original and not dependent on guns, while she'd have to have director approval. And speaking of the director, the team at Brandywine found their man in Vincent Ward, after watching The Navigator and Odyssey Across Time, which begins with stark, black and white, grainy footage set in 14th century England, where news of the impending Black Plague arrives. Led by a boy with visions of an alternate reality, the villagers dig a tunnel through the earth to escape the plague, only to emerge in 20th century New Zealand in vivid color. However, after Vincent Ward read David Toohey's script, he hated it, and turned down the opportunity to direct, prompting Brandywine to let him come up with his own idea, which would be about Ripley crash landing on an archaic wooden space station populated by monks. The producers and Sigourney Weaver loved the idea, feeling it was exactly what they were looking for, unique and capable of taking the franchise in a new direction. However, writer David Toohey, who had written the first draft aboard the prison planet, was now rewriting his draft to include Ripley, completely unaware that there was another competing script being written. Once he found out, he was so insulted that he left the project and reformulated his idea of criminals versus aliens into a script that would eventually become Pitch Black, which would star Vin Diesel. Ward's film would have opened aboard a huge, round wooden space station called Archeon, which consists of numerous levels and also has a thin atmosphere allowing it to grow crops. It's inhabited by reclusive monks who were banished from Earth by the Weyland-Yutani Corp for creating a fast-growing following that rejected all modern technology, threatening corporate profits. The monks notice a shooting star in the sky, which over the following days approaches the station until it crash lands into a surface lake, as the monks realize that it's a small ship. Inside is an unconscious Ripley and Newt, who dies on impact, as the pair had no choice but to escape the Sulaco after it had been overrun by xenomorphs, who killed Hicks and Bishop. According to director Vincent Ward, Newt had just annoyed him. However, he still had a good reason for killing her off, and that's because he wanted to give Ripley a blow that would make her struggle with whether it was worth it to continue fighting or not, as she would be looking for a new will to live. As the monks nurse Ripley back to health, she has a dream where a xenomorph rests its hand on her stomach, cocks its head, and listens, suggesting she's carrying a chest burster. When she wakes up, she keeps this nightmare to herself, but warns the monks that a facehugger could have come with her on the escape pod, but she's ignored until a chestbuster emerges from a sheet, taking on its characteristics. Following this, the monks accuse her of bringing evil to their sanctuary, believing the xenomorph as a satanic creature, or even the devil sent to test their faith, as they try Ripley in a kangaroo court before imprisoning her. After being sent to her cell in the dungeon level, Ripley befriends another prisoner, an android named Anthony, who was planted on the Archeon to keep tabs on the movement, but was imprisoned after they learned he was an android. Ripley laments that she has lost the will to fight, and has survivor's guilt over the loss of her friends and Newt. Meanwhile, more xenomorphs emerge throughout the community, including one gruesome scene in the lavatory where several monks witness one of their colleagues get violently pulled down into the toilet by a xenomorph. In another scene, reminiscent of one from the Lost World, a xenomorph stalks the defenseless monks in a wheat field as it changes its skin color like a chameleon before massacring them. Ripley and the android are eventually freed by a sympathetic monk, before the three of them travel across the space station on Ripley's ship to escape, while being stalked by a xenomorph. When they reach the surface, they find the wooden space station in flames, as they realize the fire is eating up the oxygen. Eventually, the android is killed before Ripley is able to kill the xenomorph stalking them by dropping it into a vat of molten glass, before releasing gallons of water on it, causing the molten glass to cool. The sudden temperature change causes the alien to explode into a million pieces, much like the T-1000 in Terminator 2. The film ends with Ripley realizing she has a chest burster inside her, which is the reason the xenomorph never killed her. Determined to save the monk, Ripley programs the ship ship to fly off with him, but the monk refuses, determined to save Ripley. After referencing a book he's been carrying around that shows a monk vomiting up the devil, the monk mixes some herbs in a cup of water and pours it down her throat, causing Ripley to gag and cough up the chestburster. But when she almost chokes to death on it, the monk sucks the chestburster out of her throat and into his, saving her and impregnating himself. Condemned to death but comforted by his faith, the monk walks into the fires raging across the surface of the station as Ripley escapes in the shuttle. So what went wrong? Well, a few months into pre-production, Fox announced a release date, effectively turning the project into a race against time. Executive John Landau criticized this decision, saying the studio was focused on meeting a release date rather than making a quality movie. On top of that, Sigourney Weaver had issues with the script. First of all, she wanted her character to be the one to die at the end of the movie, as she didn't want to make any more Alien films. Director Vincent Ward had no problems with that. However, Weaver was also disappointed to find that her character's journey was kind of weak, something Ward had intended to address in later drafts, but by making the mistake of not addressing it first, he had alienated his star, who began to lose confidence in him as she worried he had no idea what to do with her character. For his part, Ward had envisioned Ripley going through a dark cosmic joke, where instead of getting the family she wanted, she would get a xenomorph. On top of that, Ward's film would have been a religious metaphor that superimposed elements of alien history with Christian mythology, as Ripley, the star in the sky at the start of the story, arrives on a heavenly vehicle with the demon following her. The death knell for the idea, though, was when the studio began to have cold feet about its commercial viability, and asked him to turn the wooden space station into a mining community. Ward would refuse, as the two would part ways, with Fox left scrambling to find a replacement and rework the script, even though set construction was well underway. Commercial and music video director David Fincher would be hired after impressing everyone with not only his stylized body of work, but his confidence and vision. When Sigourney Weaver asked him how he saw Ripley in the film, he responded with, "I don't know, bald?" Which would win her over. And like Fox, Fincher didn't love Ward's wooden monastery in space, saying, "I don't know what you're doing. Alien is all about dirt and filth and oil in a hardcore technical world. Why are we doing this wooden thing?" From here, the monks would evolve into prisoners, and the wooden space station into a prison colony. As Ward's monastery sets began to be rebuilt and redressed to resemble a prison colony, Brandywine's Walter Hill and David Giler began rewriting the script themselves, which became a huge issue, because now you have a young, first-time feature film director in his late 20s who is supposed to be dictating what he wants to his writer, trying to do this with the producers of the film who not only hired him, but who don't really want to listen to the director because he's a kid. Not only that, but according to author Rex Pickett, who would go on to write the novel Sideways, when he read their script after David Fincher hired him in secret to rewrite it, he called it the most amateur screenplay he's ever read in his entire life, saying it made no narrative sense. Even James Cameron, when he was presented an outline written by Hill and Giler to adapt into the Alien screenplay, would claim it read, "Ripley gets rescued and goes back to the planet with a bunch of soldiers. They are attacked and eaten, and then some other bullshit happens," which Cameron thought trivialized the entire process of actually figuring out what the story should be. According to Rex Pickett, Walter Hill told him when he needs dialogue, he just turns on the TV and pulls dialogue from whatever show is on. After racing to rewrite the script before the start of production in London, Rex would finally complete it after about a month, leading Fox to greenlight it. This news was met with excitement and relief across all departments, as everyone now knew what they were shooting and could focus their efforts accordingly. However, when Walter Hill found out, he recalled Rex's script from every department and had them all shredded, before telling Fincher that if he doesn't direct the script that he and Giler wrote, that he's fired. It's worth noting that Sigourney Weaver also had a clause in her contract stating the final draft should be written by Hill and Giler, believing that they were the only writers besides James Cameron who knew how to write for the character of Ripley. However, Hill and Giler's script was a mess and needed tons of work, resulting in shooting starting without a locked script, as Fincher, the studio, and Hill and Giler would constantly argue about the direction of the film. This chaos meant that new changes and rewritten scenes often arrived on the day they were to be shot, or sometimes even after, forcing Fincher to reshoot them the following day. Eventually, Hill and Giler got so frustrated that they just got up and left London and returned to their offices in LA, leaving Fincher to figure it out himself. Making matters worse was the fact that cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth, who had shot one of the best-looking films of all time in Blade Runner, was forced to leave the production due to his increasingly severe Parkinson's disease, prompting Fincher to scramble to find a replacement. Michael Biehn, who played Hicks, went from initially starring in the third film to finding out that his character was going to die, upsetting him so much that he threatened to sue Fox for using his likeness without permission. And while Fox would offer a ton of money for him to do it, he refused. Instead, they asked if they could use his photograph to show that he died off screen, which led to him being paid nearly the same amount of money as the previous movie. However, before Fincher could even finish the movie, Fox shut down production and called everyone back to LA in order to cut together what had been shot so that they could see what they had, and also figure out how to finish the movie. The rough cut ended up being 3 hours long, and failed to impress anyone at Fox. And while Fincher felt he could cut it down to 2.5 hours, the studio demanded it be 2 hours flat, so it could be played more times a day in cinemas to increase profits. By the time they figured out what needed to be shot and reshot to improve and finish the movie, Weaver's hair had begun to grow back, and she didn't want to cut it again. So instead of paying a stiff penalty to her to shave her head yet again, they had to create a bald cap and painstakingly add stubble to it, which apparently not only took forever, but once it was finished was an absolute nightmare to work with. When Alien 3 was finally released, it did well enough at the box office, but was destroyed by critics, with even David Fincher saying that nobody hates it more than he does. Alien's director James Cameron regarded the decision to kill off the characters of Bishop, Newt, and Hicks as a slap in the face to him and to the fans of the previous film. Although years later, Christopher Nolan would say that he loves Alien 3, and when he first saw it, knew Fincher was going to be one of Hollywood's great directors. However, while Fincher didn't care for Vincent Ward's wooden planet, it would have been visually captivating and provided a unique backdrop for some incredible sequences. Over the years, Ward even received offers from producers to use the concept for another movie, but obviously without the xenomorph. Ward, though, would refuse, as he felt it only worked with the alien. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.